entertainment, what they mean is this big kitchen area or something like that. There's always, it has a view to die for. Well, all of these homes might be wonderful, but none of them are worth dying for. But we need to have the right perspective on life, because things can get messy and we can lose perspective, especially when things are going wild in this world. When everything isn't the way that you think it should be, then sometimes we need to get the right perspective. So I'm going to invite you to go with me to Psalm 36. Fantastic. So Psalm 36 is about somebody that sees problems. And this is what he sees. He says, an oracle within my heart concerning the transgression of the wicked person. So he's going to talk to us about bad people. That's the song. We're going to sing a song about bad people. You know, these were songs, right? It's like, what? Really? This doesn't sound like a happy song. He says, the dread of God has no effect on him. Meaning this person is not afraid of God. He does not honor God. He does not fear God. He says, and with his flattering opinion of himself, he does not discover and hate his iniquity. How many of you know people like that? I'm the man. Right? And nothing you say can touch him. And he does whatever he likes, and he's never sorry. Okay? How many of you know people like that? And you're like, where is this song going to go? I said, this doesn't seem like a happy song. I think my remote is not working. Okay, so the words from his mouth are malicious and deceptive. And he has stopped acting wisely and doing good. Even on his bed, he makes malicious plans. He sets himself on a path that is not good, and he does not reject evil. Have you noticed people don't just do bad stuff, they even plan to do bad stuff? Like, jeepers. I thought this was going to be an encouraging word. Help us here. Come on, Phil, where are you going with this? This is not good. He says, suddenly, the psalm just turns. He says, Lord, your faithful love reaches to the heaven, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the highest mountains, your judgments like the deepest sea. Lord, you preserve people and animals. How did we go from... It's like, did I leave out some verses? No, I promise. You can go and check it in your Bible as well. I didn't leave out any verses. And by the way, I didn't get the memo. I'm not supposed to put up all the verses on the screen. I'm supposed to force you to read your own Bibles. But it's a good thing that I didn't get the memo, because this morning my printer wouldn't work. So I couldn't print out my notes. So it's a good thing that I didn't get the memo. But in the future, please bring along your own Bible so that you can follow along. We want to encourage you to read your own Bibles. He just goes over from talking about this bad person that makes bad plans to the faithfulness of God. Wow, okay. How priceless your faithful love is, God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They're filled from the abundance of your house. You let them drink from your refreshing stream. For the wellspring of life is with you. By means of your light, we see light. Older translation says, in your light, we see light. Spread your faithful love over those who know you, and your righteousness over the upright in heart. Do not let the foot of the arrogant come near me, or the hand of the wicked drive me away. There, the evildoers have fallen. They've been thrown down and cannot rise. Like, when did that happen? Okay, how did we go from this bad people and the goodness and the faithfulness of God, and the evildoers have fallen? It hasn't happened yet. But he's changing his perspective. Like, I'm looking at everything that's wrong down here, and the horrible people and the horrible things that they do, the horrible things that they plan. And then I choose to look somewhere else. I take my eyes and I put it on God. And I get a new perspective on life. I say, all right, Lord, it hasn't come to pass yet, but I know when the dust settles, you'll judge all things. It's not my job to judge evil people. It's not my job to attack them. My job is to get my eyes on you and live from that reality. You are real, and you do reward the just, even if it's not in this life. When the dust settles, I'll be with God forever. He's going to judge, and I'm going to leave it to Him. And even if I don't see it now, as I pray, as I focus on who you are, my perspective on the messiness of this world changes. I might not have seen it in person yet, but for me, it's as good as done. That's quite a psalm, isn't it? That's the shift is so sudden. Now, this is an Old Testament example, and that was the introduction to today. So now we're going to look at a New Testament example. All right. So, the book of Revelation. Go all the way to the book of Revelation. We've just worked through the book of Revelation very briefly in Bible school, and we're almost at the end of this module. And by the way, if you want to sign up for the next module that's going to start in a few weeks, you're more than welcome to do that. But as I was preparing for this sermon, I just looked at the book of Revelation and I realized, gee, there's some stuff here that really goes with this perspective. So, when you get to the book of Revelation, there's two groups of people. People that you can never get into the book because it's too weird, and people that you can never get out of the book because they're too weird, right? So, but I want to encourage you. We are actually the book of Revelation. We are the church of Revelation. What I mean by that is, the book of Revelation was written to churches. We're the intended audience, if you understand what I mean, right? And the book of Revelation was written to churches in the middle of trouble. They were going through difficulty. And if you want to know how to survive in a hostile world, you need to be part of the church of Revelation. And the third meaning, we need to be a church that can get revelation from God. And that's the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is actually to change your perspective. Because these 7 churches that were in Asia Minor, it's what's Western Turkey now, they were going through persecution at this time. You know those first chapters that speak specifically, that's written to churches, the church in Ephesus and so on, they were real places with real churches. And Jesus understood what they were going through. And in that first vision it says, He walks among the lampstands, the 7 lampstands, and He holds 7 stars in His right hand. And then He explains what it is. He says, it's the 7 churches that I hold in my hand. Jesus has things under control, even when He doesn't feel like it. Okay. Now, these 7 churches have different characteristics, and relax, we're not going to look at all of them. And everybody goes, phew. But I do want to talk to you about the second church that Jesus speaks to. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of what they were facing at that time. But before Jesus starts speaking to them, John has a vision of Jesus. Jesus doesn't begin with their problems and their situation. Jesus begins by showing Himself to John in a way that John has never seen Him before. Remember, this is the same John that says about himself, I'm the disciple that Jesus loved. Okay? He thought he knew Jesus. And if you read his gospel, it's intimate and it's beautiful, and he emphasizes the love of God so much. And he understood Jesus and his love. But this same John, when he sees Jesus like this, okay, he faints. It's like he passes out. Okay, this is not the way that he had ever seen Jesus before. So he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard a loud voice behind me like a trumpet, saying, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches. Then I turned to see whose voice it was that spoke to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was one like the Son of Man, dressed in a robe with a golden sash wrapped around his chest. His hair was white as wool, white as snow, and his eyes a fiery flame. So there's 2 things that you have to know about this. Somebody that wore a sash, a golden sash around their chest, that was a Roman judge. He's seeing the resurrected, glorified Jesus, but Jesus is coming as a judge. All right? But he also says, I see one like the Son of Man. This is straight out of the book of Daniel. Okay. At the end of time, Daniel sees God setting up thrones, and you're expecting God is going to judge the nations, and instead, one like the Son of Man comes, whose hair is white like wool. And all dominion and authority is given to him, and he sits down and judges the nations. Can you see what's happening in this vision? Jesus is taking things from a Roman culture, because they're living under the Roman Empire, right? And he's taking things from Jewish culture, and he's putting them together, and he says, I'm here, and I'm here as judge. You see how powerful that is? Then he says this, his feet were like fine bronze, as it was fired in a furnace, and his voice like the sound of cascading waters. Okay. Bronze, all throughout the Old Testament, is a sign of judgment. But this is glowing bronze. They're glowing bright. Okay. And he had 7 stars in his right hand. A sharp, double-edged sword came from his mouth, and his face was shining like the sun at full strength. Now, I was always wondering about what's this thing with the sword coming out of his mouth. Well, actually, Greek swords, not Roman swords, but Greek swords, many of them were sort of shaped like a tongue. Okay? It's like an elongated heart with a groove down the middle. But later, in this book, when Jesus comes as the rider on the white horse, and all the nations is gathered against God's people, he slays them with the word of his mouth. Okay. This is not Jesus meek and mild. This is a very different idea. We're getting a different perspective, and we need this one too. We need to read the Gospels, and we need to understand Jesus as the man that spoke like nobody else, that represented God on earth, that showed us God's love and compassion. We need that idea of Jesus. But we also need to know he's the one that holds all history in his hand. And when it's all done, he will judge the nations. We need to know that he has all power and authority. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. That must be frustrating. You're trying to dictate a letter, and your secretary keeps on fainting. He laid his right hand on me and said, don't be afraid. I'm the first and the last, and the living one. I was dead, but look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. He's got it in control. Whatever else you might see and experience in your world, Jesus has this thing under control. There is opposition. when we say Jesus has things in control, we are not saying Jesus is remote controlling everybody. Okay, can you hear the difference? Right? People can still choose to be stupid and evil. And the devil has not disappeared yet. And demons are real. And sin and horrible plans still take place in this world. And God is not the cause of evil. But He will not let evil win. When it's all said and done, God has it under control. So, this is the second letter that Jesus dictates to the second church. He says to the church in Smyrna, "Thus says the first and the last, the one who was dead and came to life." Now, do you see that he's taking part of that vision, right? He appeared to John and he said, "This is who I am." And now he's taking a part of that and he's saying, "This is my name to this church. My name to this church is, I'm the first and the last. I'm the one that was dead and came back to life again." Now, Smyrna is one of the few cities that still exist until today from that book of Revelation. Ephesus is just ruins because Ephesus was a port city, but the port silted up, so it's now something like 3-4 kilometers inland. Okay, so that's why they abandoned the city and they just left everything there, which means, of course, you can go there and you can look at these amazing amphitheaters and these buildings, and it's like they had a piece of a hill carved out into an amphitheater that could seat 24,000 people. Okay, that's impressive, right? But if you go to Smyrna today, you won't see any of that because it's all been built over, because the city is still alive. In fact, this city, and by the way, if you look it up on Google, you're not going to find Smyrna. It had a name change. It's now called Izmir. Okay? It's the largest city in Turkey, and it's also the richest city in Turkey until today. Because they're a port city that didn't silt up, and they kept living there, and this city has been destroyed multiple times. There's a war. The Persians come through, and they destroy the city. And then the city is rebuilt. There's an earthquake, and the city falls apart, and people come back there and they rebuild it. This city has been dead several times. And every time the city comes back to life. Isn't that interesting? Jesus says, "I'm the one that was dead, but I've come back to life." He knows their situation. He knows where they're living. He knows the situation there. Now, why do people keep building there? Because it has a beautiful climate. It has this gentle breeze that breaks the heat of the Mediterranean. It's called the zephyr, this lovely little breeze that comes. And it's beautiful, and it's at the end of a river, and it's fantastic, and it's rich. These people are rich because it's located right for trade. It's rich and it's people are very cultured. This is actually where, if you know who Homer is, that wrote the Iliad, okay, he was actually born here. Okay, these people are fancy. Okay, they're rich and they're fancy and they've got culture and everything. Okay, he says to them, "I know your affliction and poverty." Why is the church poor in this immensely rich city? Because the church has disassociated themselves from the trade networks, because every trade had its own god. Like if you were a silversmith, you had a god that you worshipped. If you made pottery, you had a god of pottery that you worshipped as part of your business. So whatever business you were in, now that you're a Christian, what are you going to do? If you go to the guild meeting, they start with getting drunk, and then at the end they bring in the temple prostitutes. So what are you going to do? Are you going to come after the drinking and before the prostitutes? Or how are you going to? Okay, so the Christians started to withdraw from these things. but that has financial implications. I wonder how many of you have noticed that it's difficult to do business if you're an honest person and everybody else is taking graft. Okay? The Christians in Smyrna understands your situation. They know what it's like. The Jews didn't participate in these things, but their trade network was also close to you. If you were a Jew and you became a Christian, by this time, the Jews had actually pushed out all the Christians. Okay. So they're in a rich city, cultivated, lovely, it's beautiful. You know, it's one of those cities that has been destroyed and rebuilt. And you know when you rebuild, what you do? You build better. You plan the city better, right? It's a beautiful planned city. But these guys are poor. And in this city, they have temples to the Roman gods and to the Greek gods, especially the emperors. You see, these guys knew when to jump ship. Okay? Now, if you read a little bit about their history, I'm just going to go down a little bit. I don't know if I have that image on here. But there were... Okay, so never mind. I'll just tell you about it. All right? So, in this area, these people weren't Greek, but they have Greek culture. Why? Because when the Greeks came through, they said, we're loyal to the Greeks. Okay? And then when the Persians came through and conquered, they said, we're loyal to the Persians. And when the Romans came through, they said, we're loyal to the Romans. And we'll even build temples to your gods to show how loyal you are. And then they found out, oh, one of these emperors considered himself a god. They said, can we worship you? Can we build a temple to you? And Augustus said, yeah, sure. So he gave them good tax breaks. They said, hey, this works. So every time that there was a new emperor, they built a new temple to a new emperor. Okay. I don't think they were actually worshiping the emperor. They were worshiping money and power. And now the Christians say, we cannot confess Caesar as Lord because Jesus is Lord. Can you see why this is a difficult time for these guys? How many of you feel like that sometimes? You can't say anything in a public sphere about Jesus because you used the name of Jesus. Right? You can talk about God or the divine or the spiritual, but don't use the name Jesus. Or if you're going to say Jesus, you have to say he's a way to God, but don't say he's the only way to God, right? You can worship many gods, and you can include Jesus in that, but don't say you only worship Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm the first and the last. I'm the beginning and the end. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. He's Lord. In this book, he's called the Almighty. Okay. See, their loyalties are pushed to the brink. So, Jesus says to them, I know your affliction and your poverty, but you are rich. I know the slander of those who say that they are Jews, but they are not. They are of the synagogue of Satan. What? What are you saying? The Jews were reporting the Christians as disloyal to the emperor. Okay, so many of them were facing harsh persecution and seizure of their property. And then he gives them fantastic news. Don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Doesn't sound like good news. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you. And you will experience affliction for 10 days. Be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. I love the fact that Jesus is honest with us. He doesn't say, just come to me and you'll never have problems again. It'll all be fine. Okay. No, Jesus tells you, because you're loyal to me, you're going to have some problems. But it's okay. This is not the end. No matter what happens, this is not the end. It's not the end of the story. Even if it costs you your life. And I was like, Lord, is this really what I need to share today? I mean, I was like, it doesn't feel like I want to encourage people. The encouragement isn't that nothing will go wrong. The encouragement is, no matter how wild it gets in this world, God will have the last word. It's not a cheap answer, right? Just confess you are above and not below. You're the head and not the tail. You're a conqueror. And yes, we are more than conquerors because we do not love our life. Later in this book, it talks about the Christians overcoming the devil. And it says they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their own lives. Okay. Can you see the connection? There is good news. We are going to overcome. We are the overcomers. But God requires us to take some action, to remain loyal to Him. And your loyalty will be tested. But this means that you have to change your perspective. If you've been living for your wealth, you have to think again, because none of it's going to go with you. And if you're going to be loyal to Jesus, you might be challenged in that area. If you've been living for influence and power, what are you going to do when people push you out? How many of you have had experiences like that in your family or at work? I have several friends that's talked to me in the last few months where they've basically been pushed out of their place of work, not because of anything that they've done wrong. But there's politics involved. There's politics involved. You see, in this place where they were living, there was no daylight between politics and religion. Okay? This whole thing about separation of church and state wasn't there in that place. Problem is, it wasn't the church that was in league with the government. It was the other powers that be. Okay. And Jesus says, where's your loyalty? And I want to ask you, have you gotten to the point where that man in Psalm 36 is? You look at the evil people and you say, they have no fear of God. Everything seems to be going right for them. These people make evil plans and they seem to be prospering, and what's going on? And I want to tell you, you can lift up your eyes. You can lift up your eyes and you can get a different perspective. Now he says, you will be imprisoned for a short while. 10 days. You will suffer persecution for 10 days. Now whether it was a literal 10 days or not, the point that you have to get is it's not forever. In fact, in this place, in Smyrna, that is now today Izmir, it's the only one of those 7 cities that still has a living and active church. Jesus will bring us through. He will bring you through. You might go through difficult things, but He's going to bring you through. He says, be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. This is not the crown that you give a king. This is the crown that you give an athlete when he wins the race. Okay? That's what Paul also writes about. He says, I have run my race. I have finished my course. And now there is laid up for me the crown of victory. You see that? That's the laurel wreath. That's what we're running for. And Paul says, the people of this world, they will discipline their bodies and they'll run to get a crown made of leaves that's going to wilt. Right? Oh, you got the laurel wreath. Yay, wonderful. And in 3-4 days, it's like, eh. He says, we're competing for a crown that will never fade. That's what we're heading for. You're not competing against other people. You run your race. You run your race. The book of Hebrews says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Run the race with endurance that's set before you. You know, one day Corlia preached about that verse and she said, if you run your race, you lock eyes with Jesus. He's standing at the end and he's inviting you and he says, run. Run to me. Run to me. Fix your eyes on the author and the perfecter of your faith, and you run with endurance. I want to encourage you. You need to catch a glimpse of who Jesus really is. Because if you can understand, He's the author of all things. He's the Almighty. He's the first and the last. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's the one that comes to judge the nations in righteousness. He's the rider on the white horse. He's the one coming on the clouds of glory. He's the one that has a sword coming out of His mouth. He's the one with eyes like fire. He shines like the sun in all its strength. You catch a glimpse of who it is that you belong to. That will carry you when everything in the world seems to be upside down. When you don't know where to turn, then you're not going to need a nice thought. You're going to need the reality of the risen Christ. That's what we build our life on, and that's what we're living towards. You need to have a vision of Christ. That is a view worth dying for. Right? When you catch that, that's where I'm heading. That's where I'm heading. Jesus is waiting for me. And everything that I do in this life, the way that I do my work, the way that I'm honest in my work, even if it costs me. The things that I'm not willing to compromise on, the way that I treat the people around me, the way that I speak to the people around me, all of this is part of me running my race towards the one that is standing at the end and is waiting for me. Enjoy the good things that God gives you in this life. Okay? Don't take this as I'm saying Jesus doesn't want you to have anything good. Just suffer until He comes again. Okay? It's not what I'm saying. Okay? If God gives you ability and opportunity and He blesses you financially and it goes well with you, enjoy it. Enjoy your family. Enjoy the things that you buy with the money that you earned. And don't feel bad about it. Okay? But know that all of that will come and it will go. Okay? There is no house with a view to die for. There's nothing in this world
that is worth what we have in the author of all things. I know when things get tough, it's very difficult to take my eyes off that. The people in Smyrna understands what that's like. To be surrounded by a culture and a political atmosphere and a religious atmosphere where everything that is right is turned upside down. And yet Jesus says, don't worry. Even if it costs you your life, I'm the one that was dead, and I've come back to life. I've got this. I love what Lindsay said. We trust Him with our life. He's worthy to receive our trust and our faith. I want to read you this passage from a few chapters further on, and it's not going to be on the screen. But this is in Revelation 5. It's in the next vision. It's when Jesus comes and no one on heaven or on earth is worthy to open the scroll that's going to put history into effect. And John says, how is God's will going to be done if nobody can be found? And then he hears the angels say, look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy. Then he turns, but he doesn't see a lion. He sees a lamb that was slain. And then all of heaven breaks out in worship. And here in chapter 5, it says this. I'm going to start in verse 11. Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and also of the living creatures and the elders, and their number was countless thousands, plus thousands of thousands. I guess that means there were a lot. They said with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And I heard every creature in heaven, on earth, under the earth, and in the sea, and everything in them saying, blessing and honor and glory and power to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. He's worthy. He's worthy to receive your life. He's worthy to receive your worship. And if you trust Him with your life, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. Our theme for this year is to raise the standard. I want to tell you, many times people will tell us about good goals to pursue. That there might be nice things, there might be good things, there might even be things that God intends for us to have. But we need to raise the standard for what we're living for. To catch a glimpse of who Jesus really is. And to live for that. That is a standard worth living for. And when you come to Him in prayer about the very real issues that you face, you have real issues in your health, you have real issues in your family, you have real issues just because of the pressures of this world. He cares and He is powerful and He can bring you through that. But those things are small in comparison with the eternal hope that God has for us. I want you to raise the standard of what you live for. Have goals, have plans, have purposes. But raise your eyes higher. When things get tough, that's an opportunity to say, I need to stop looking down here. Because if I just keep looking down here, I'm just going to go further and further down into depression. I need to lift my eyes up. In your light, I will see light. I want everybody to close their eyes. I would love to pray for specific people. I'm not going to ask you to come forward, but I do want you to where you are, if you need to have a different perspective. If you realize that you need to look at your own life and at the circumstances around you in a different way. If you realize that you've been focusing on things that will be here today and gone tomorrow. If you've allowed the injustice of the evil that you see in this world to capture your heart and your attention, I need you, right where you are right now, to stand on your feet as a way of saying, Lord, I need to catch a new vision of who you are. If that's you, I'm going to invite you to stand right now. Holy Spirit, you see your children. You see your children that come to you and say, Lord, I need to have a different vision. I need to get a different perspective. I'm tired of looking at what's wrong and allowing that to fill my vision. Holy Spirit, give us a new vision. For every person standing on their feet, fill our hearts, fill our eyes, fill our minds with a brand new appreciation of who you are. And Lord, we do feel the pressures. We feel the very real pressures of this life. But we want to lift our eyes higher. We want to lift our eyes up. We want to behold you in your beauty and in your glory.